Kutzler YMX uses the Netradyne two-way camera system in all of our power units. The Netradyne cameras have more than once exonerated a driver who was perceived to be at fault, as well as saved our Kutzler YMX from paying damages related to an accident. We are already seeing, just in 1 year of Netradyne, the impact of better safety scores and fewer damages and incidents in our insurance rates.
And welcome to this week's iteration of Freightonomics, where we combine the freight market, supply chain, transportation, and that macroeconomic information into one single source. I'm Zach Strickland, head of Freight Market Intelligence. Tony Mulvey,
senior analyst.
And we are going to break down the latest trends in the freight market today, as well as potentially have some side guest engagement. So we will continue on with the show and start by saying that, Craig and I had a little, step aside show, ad hoc, declaring the end of the freight recession this week, Tony. And, I think the feedback has largely been taken with, yes, we're feeling something. A lot of the participants, we obviously talked to several people in the space, shippers, brokers, and carriers. I don't know that anybody has definitively said, no, you're wrong.
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of in agreement that we'll call it next year really is going to be better if you're a transportation provider than it has been this year. I think that's been the biggest takeaway. And for shippers, like we've talked about it here, the era of cost savings on transportation budgets is probably in the past, and we're moving away from that. So now it turns to risk mitigation, and how do you limit the amount of risk that you have to changing market conditions? Because at the end of the day, they're starting to change. I think we'll touch on it here when you get in your marketing too, but if you see the direction that's tender rejection rates are moving, and when they're moving, it's earlier than normal. It's at a level that's elevated relative to kind of where it's been outside of a holiday earlier this year. I mean, it really, like, we haven't been at these levels. Even we're above where we basically the holiday last year.
Let's go ahead and start. Let's set the tone, if you will, with some data.
So we'll do the marketing two first to kick us off. Yeah. And Zach, we'll count you in 3, 2, 1.
All right. First things first, tender rejection index. This is one of the multiple data points that CEO and founder Craig Fuller has cited the other day, stating that the freight recession is over. Now, if you look at this, the 6%-ish tender rejection rate, we've fallen just below that a little bit here in the last day or so, but it is still relatively low, and it's certainly nowhere near what we saw during COVID. Now, COVID is not the benchmark for market tightness. COVID is the benchmark for extreme chaos, and we're not expecting to go back to that level, at least anytime soon-ish. I think the point of saying that the end of the freight recession is really derived from the direction of the tender rejection index, which you can see moving higher over the last year and a half. May of 2023 was the ultimate bottom of the tender rejection index, around 2.5%. And the fact that we are continuing to trend higher, and you see 2019 there in orange, that looks like a decent little roadmap. We'll see if it sticks and holds, but it looks like a decent little roadmap for the rest of the year as the market becomes increasingly vulnerable and more responsive. Let's go to the next chart. Talk about spot rates. One, it includes fuel. The other does not. And the reason we exclude fuel is because fuel has been deflationary. And so removing that in the yellow line, we can see that the market itself, transportation costs, have been inflating over the last year or so. And then we have a more flat, but not necessarily down trend on when we include fuel. Now, the takeaway here, the market tightening rapidly, this spiking activity. We've had 3 pretty big events this year, 2 of them now being non-holiday related. So again, another component of this. Now, let's go to the next chart. Probably the last chart we have time for here. Outbound tender volume index combined with the outbound loaded intermodal container on the rail. Intermodal is really muting the potential of a freight market flip here by continuing to take share in November in the yellow line in a month where we typically don't see that.
Yeah, I think the intermodal sector's been the relief valve for the market. If you look at import levels, really broadly speaking, I mean, they're up significantly. I mean, I think it was September in Savannah was up 17% year over year, and like it's like kind of muted compared to other ports. So I think that's an interesting one that like maybe the sense of urgency isn't there. But I think it's also a testament to the rails and intermodal providers, the service that they've been able to provide. I think when you look at intermodal kind of had an opportunity to do something similar back in COVID to some degree, and the infrastructure failed. It's not failing now.
Right.
And I think that's the takeaway, is that the improvements that they've made to service have been so great. And I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I mean, I think it's the supply chain and transportation market would be extremely different if the intermodal sector crippled like it did back in COVID. When you look at where import levels are and just the freight market as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the fact that we're still seeing a market turn while outbound tender volumes are declining is kind of a telling tale that capacity is leaving the market, and it is left enough to where we're now seeing increasing levels of responsiveness.
Yeah, and it's exposure into just like it's regional to some degree. I mean, we talked about it where Southern California had its kind of moment in the sun earlier this year, especially in the summer. It kind of caught people off guard that there was so much volume coming out that there wasn't enough capacity ultimately to service it. I mean, you saw rejection rates in Southern California jumped to what, 7, 8, 9%, somewhere in that range. Like,
over the summer.
Over the summer. Now people understand, hey, there's still a lot of freight coming out of Southern California. Carriers are going in, but I think what you're seeing is recently you've seen an uptick out there. I mean,
let's pull up the Los Angeles to Dallas spot rate chart real quick, just to add some data to this. I mean, this is the average spot rate, including fuel, going from Los Angeles to Dallas over the last year or so, or actually it's more the 7-8 months. But yeah, it's obviously the trending higher. We've seen spot rates and rejection rates in October throughout the month really take off. Going to Chicago, it's more volatile, but not necessarily as up, because I think that lane has already had a lot of inflation in it based on the summer.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other interesting part is like this is one of the densest transportation freight lanes in the country. To see the movement that we've seen in this, and I mean, the scale kind of, I don't want to say skews it. I mean, it's up what, $500-$600 since, call it, middle of the summer.
Now, there is a pretty sharp drop there at the end that, does correlate with a lot of our other data and the demand side drop, and it's pretty rapid.
Yeah.
Like, I know we're still up, but like the near-term signal here is that we might have a little bit of a reversion before Thanksgiving. And I don't know that necessarily means that we're out of the woods in terms of the freight market being, responsive.
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of out of season to see this now.
Yeah, I think so. I just did the math while we were sitting here. I mean, a $500 increase is over the 1,400 miles is about a 35 cent per mile increase. So it's nothing to scoff at for sure. So I think it's looking at it, I've seen the increase is really impressive. And I think what's interesting about this one in particular, and I write about this lane every week in the pricing power index because it is so important, is if you had the contract rate on here, they're so close, which is where the risk really lies.
Yeah, I took it off just for cleanliness and simplicity. But yeah, the contract rate actually below that spot rate in terms of our invoice data. And that is a big signal that carriers now have financial, something incentivizing them financially to bail on their contracts.
Yeah.
Going from Los Angeles to Dallas.
Absolutely. But before we get too far in the show, we do need to thank our sponsor. So Netradyne. So remove the guesswork from driver management and fleet safety and start predicting your accident reduction cost savings. Netradyne's AI-enabled video safety platform corrects unsafe driving habits, recognizing and reinforcing great driving. With the Green Zone score, your fleet of engaged drivers will protect your bottom line. Every 50 points earned is a 14% cut to your accident rate.
Now, we do have a guest from Netradyne coming on here in just a minute, but I want to set the table with a couple of stories first before we bring on Matt Thornton, Senior Product Manager of Netradyne. Is going to talk to us about a new product release here in just a second. So before we do that, I want to talk about a couple of topical stories, and I think some of these lead well into what he is going to discuss with us. The first one, probably not as much. The ILA strike. This is obviously an ongoing story that you have to monitor. I still don't know that this is going to be something that disruptive to the freight market, but it is something to watch. Based on the timing of this is when all those imports will start to come in from China Lunar New Year pull forward that happens every January. Typically a West Coast centric thing anyway, just like the one that happened in October was. But again, something to watch. They're rejecting the recent proposal as they've gone back to the table. They have until January 15th to ratify this thing. They've extended the deadline to then. They've already agreed to the wages, but now there's a little bit of back and forth over, are they introducing automation? And this is obviously, the unions have been extremely adamant that they are not for any automation.
Yeah. Their fear is that it's going to reduce union jobs, where you get the USMX, so United States Maritime Alliance. So basically the ports, basically saying they're not trying to with the automation, they're not trying to eliminate jobs. They're trying to implement tech to kind of
modernization.
Yes.
It's like you're redoing your kitchen. It doesn't necessarily make it, you don't need the kitchen, and
it makes things more efficient, right? Like if it makes the
safety too.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get a driver through a gate in a matter of a couple minutes versus like 1 to 2 minutes versus, I don't know what it's running, 10, 15, like speeding that process up speeds everything up. And if you can do it by automating it, it seems to make sense. Right. But I do understand from the union perspective, at the end of the day, the union's president's job is to make sure that his union members,
negotiation process.
Yeah.
And, sometimes hyperbole is the point.
Yes.
And that's something, again, keep an eye on it. Not necessarily a huge story just yet. This one right here, I think, really leads well into our guest and an ongoing concern. And I think now with the administration change, this will be a topic of interest. Latest nuclear verdict in trucking, $141.5 million against defunct Florida carrier. Now, this is, again, the details of this story, I don't know, like, there was obviously negligence on the driver's part. It was a very bad setup in general, but this carrier's been out of business for 2 years.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have this large headline number still available, like to be served and handed, I mean, that money's not going to be awarded. You can't just manifest it.
Yeah.
There's no asset. There's no insurance coverage. There's nothing there to collect on. But the fact that we're still seeing these kind of verdicts against carriers, and in an environment where you need to have like some semblance of, safety and, culture of safety to really drive this forward. And it's just not been manifested in the public view.
Yeah. We've talked about it a bunch on this show with Netradyne that like the safety element, a lot of the times it's not seen on the P&L, at least until something happens. Right.
Yeah.
But the idea of making investments into things like again, bringing up Netradyne again, where we've talked about it, like if you make those investments now, does it cost you money now? Yes. But if you can limit the downside, the risk there of getting hit with a $150 million nuclear verdict, like it's protecting your bottom line at the end of the day. It's now, and everybody thinks it won't happen to them until it does. And I think that's the element that...
And you don't even, the Werner situation alone should tell you that. Now that one, I don't know that I view in the same way that the court does, that there is negligence on the driver's part at all.
Yeah.
Like that one, they were on the opposite side of the road. The other car came into their side of the road and created the accident. Well, anyway, without further ado, let's bring on Matt Thornton, Senior Product Manager of Netradyne, to talk about their latest offering. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, morning or afternoon, guys.
Afternoon. I guess, where are you located, Matt?
I'm in San Diego. So
San Diego. Wonderful. Wonderful city out there. I have spent lots of time there. The gas lamp district out there was super fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you and welcome to the show. So you have a new item that you guys are going to be offering here, the Drowsy driving detector here, the sensor here. Now tell us a little bit about this, and of course, introduce Netradyne too, if you can.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good. So yeah, Netradyne is a safety technology company for the fleet management industry. So we've been, making fleet or driver safety products for several years. I think the company was founded in 2016 or 2017. And I know that a lot of people from our company have been on this show before to talk about the importance of driver safety. The new product that we just launched is called the DMS sensor. So it is a dedicated sensor to monitor the driver monitoring system, but it is able to do so with a lot higher resolution to more accurately detect when a driver is drowsy, to be able to bring that to the attention of the driver and to bring that to the attention of their safety managers back in operations.
That's awesome. I think the question would be with Netradyne, you all already had the driver eye, that dash cam that kind of did something similar where it picked up forward look or looking back at the driver, it could detect that drowsiness. Like what is the reason behind going with a sensor like this, having like that additional hardware component versus just relying on a system that was already in place?
Yeah, great question. So the driver eye product that we've launched, and we have multiple product lines for it, it's a multi-camera system that sits in the center and in the top of a windshield. And the inward-facing camera monitors the driver, but has a view of the entire cabin as well. So you're able to see what's happening, in the passenger seat, in the cargo area, if you can see through in the back, or the sleeper if you need to. But why you need to have a dedicated sensor for super accurate drowsy detection is because it's a much more nuanced behavior. So the system is looking for really minute granular details of how the driver is expressing drowsiness. So looking at the percentage that their eyes are closed, looking at how their blinking behavior is changing over time, looking at really small details that if you have a cabin facing sensor where it's looking, it has a fixed, it's an image sensor, it has a fixed number of pixels, and it's using those pixels to look at the entire cabin. It's not using all of those pixels in the most efficient way to be able to detect these really nuanced behaviors that express drowsiness. But by having a dedicated DMS sensor where the field of view is more narrow, so all of the high resolution image sensors can be dedicated to detecting these behaviors, which are, for lack of a better word, hard to detect. It's able to do so better, more accurately. And that's important because the drivers need to trust the system, the safety managers need to trust what the system is telling them. So being able to detect the behaviors very accurately is critical for adoption of this feature. Another reason why having this dedicated hardware is important is because, it's slightly in how it works and how it's mounted. So having a dedicated DMS sensor that's positioned slightly downward and looking up at the driver's face helps to differentiate the kind of a common case between looking down and having your eyes closed. And you need the system to be automatically able to differentiate those two types of behavior, because eyes closed in a microsleep is an urgent scenario that you need to alert on. A safety manager or an operational manager needs to know that a driver is falling asleep. Whereas if somebody's looking down, that's important to talk about distraction and to coach on distraction, but it doesn't have the same level of urgency.
So how are fleets gaining insights from this? Like, how are they utilizing the data that they get from this?
So there's a few different players involved in this system. So the driver themselves, they are the ones who are they're getting the first line of alerts. So if a driver starts to fall asleep or is showing signs of drowsiness, they're going to get in-cab audio alerts, and that wakes them up, that brings their attention back to the road, that makes them think about their attentive state. The system also is detecting this and then raising all of these as alerts with video to our cloud. So then it's shown in a platform in our dashboard where a person in an operational capacity can subscribe to getting these alerts and notifications in almost close to real time in just a minute. In about a minute of after the alert is raised on the device, a person who's looking at our portal also sees that same alert with video on their dashboard, and they can subscribe with different subscription methods. So they're able to review what's happening in a cabin with the driver and make a maybe a more difficult decision of, should I call that driver and ask them to get off the road, because as an operational person, I'm seeing a high risk that they might be in a falling asleep and be in a very dangerous situation. And as a manager, you would call that person and say, hey, I think you need to pull over and take a break.
So I've got one for you. I know, like, we've talked about the cameras before and kind of drivers' hesitation for putting the camera in the cab. Do you think that drivers, like, this sensor will be more, they'd be more willing to adopt something like this that's not watching every single move, but looking for very distinct, I don't want to say distraction, drowsiness, versus like watching every move with the camera with an alert, things like that. And I say that because I look at like cars nowadays, like they've got these distracted measures. It's not a camera, but it is picking up on some of the signs. Do you think driver willingness to adopt something like this will be maybe easier to get across to them versus a camera in the cab with them?
Yeah, I think so. And as I mentioned, in order for this piece of technology to work better, it has a narrower field of view. So it's really just looking at the driver, and it's not showing, everything else that's happening in the cabin that might be happening in the cabin. And this piece of technology is to assist the driver. It's, driver first technology. It's to wake them up in cases where they might be showing signs where they're about to fall asleep. It's not designed to be punitive or to be somehow punishing them for what they may or may not be doing in their cabin. It's just to get their attention back on the road, and it fits within our driver first, driver advocacy type of approach to safety, which is we want the drivers to be aware of the risks of the road, and we want them to be the safest drivers they can be, and we want to encourage positive safety discussions. So we have our green zone score, we have positive driver streaks, and we also have driver assisting technology. So it's meant to help the drivers, not to hurt them in any way, or not to make them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about what you guys do, is you kind of turn it into the, almost a gamification for the driver themselves, to where they now have like goals and targets. It's feedback for them specifically. And I think that's valuable, especially when you think about the lifestyle of a driver. They're listening to somebody 3,000 miles away, giving them constant feedback. Now you rely on the technology to do that for you. It's also very logical and specific. It's objective technology at that allows them to understand what's going on. Because I've driven Drowsy plenty of times, and there's times where I'm not the best judge because I'm tired of whether or not I should be driving or not. And certainly in these situations where you're talking about, maybe the person 3,000 miles away is trying to gauge that. Now the technology does it for you. So what's next on the roadmap?
Yeah, and this is an area where this is our third generation of a drowsy detection system. So this is an area where we've been putting in a lot of our resources because we see it as a big problem. And you started this, you introduced me by showing that slide where there was a fleet who has $140 million nuclear verdict against them. There's a lot of fleets out there like that. This is roughly like a $20 billion problem where due to drowsy related accidents, fleets are impacted with a $20 billion price tag. So it's a huge problem. It's a safety problem for the roads, but it's also a financial problem. Mm-hmm. So we see this as an area to put a lot of effort into investing because it can go a long way. So beyond this new product that we're launching, it fits into our multi-camera system where we have side cameras, we have an outward facing camera. And so another area that we're working on is bringing together all of those views to have a more automated way of kind of like sensor fusion. So determining when the driver is not perfectly maintaining their lane position and being able to detect out of lane events and correlate that directly with what the inward camera is seeing to highlight that as, as more elevated risk to both the driver and to safety managers. We're also looking at building out reporting tools to better allow fleets to understand these trends that we're detecting. So the area that we wanted to approach first is allowing safety managers and drivers to intervene in the moment. So knowing when drowsiness is happening right away, super accurately. But beyond that, you also need to understand the trend, right? Did somebody become drowsy over time as they started driving? Are certain drivers driving in shifts that maybe don't fit for their schedules, or something beyond that is a trend that you could talk about and understand better. So looking at how to report and show those analytics better to safety managers so they can better understand the data.
Well, that's fantastic stuff. And Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show today to talk about this. This is an extremely important thing, especially for drivers and driver managers out there who deal with this constantly. Tell everybody real quick where they can reach out to find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so find more information about Netradyne, netradyne.com. We're active on LinkedIn, so we're posting a bunch of new stuff that's happening, and we're excited about the future and about the new products that we're launching.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt. And we look forward to hearing more about what Netradyne has to offer. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, man.
Yeah.
The driver drowsiness. I mean, we haven't talked about it, but one of the big concerns in trucking is truck parking.
Yep.
Because they can't get to somewhere they can sleep.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it for this week's edition of Freightonomics. Thanks to Matt and Netradyne once again, and everybody, have a great week.